Cornish Mutual, farming insurance experts.
Hello and welcome to this bonus episode of Farming Focus, the podcast for South West farmers brought to you by Cornish Mutual. I'm your host, Peter Green. Today I'm joined once again by Tom Mottram from Porter Dodson Solicitors and Advisors and farmer and co-founder of Ladies in Beef, Jilly Greed. Last week we were discussing a range of topics to do with succession, but this week we're focusing on gifts and gifting and what you should be thinking about when it comes to gifting. Tom, first of all, could you outline what we mean when we say when we talk about gifting?
Yeah, gifting is such an important part of succession planning, and I suppose you can think about it in a couple of different ways in terms of who is the recipient. So you might be leaving gifts out to somebody as part of your planning, or you might be leaving it in such a way as you can ensure that you retain some degree of control for whatever reason. And you might have different options there depending on the circumstances. But from the revenues perspective, if you are reducing the value of your estate for the benefit of somebody else, that is, for inheritance tax purposes, a gift. And believe it or not, it's not always the case that the size of the gift is the same as the reduction in your estate, confusingly. So that's always worth bearing in mind, at least so far as the revenue is concerned.
Okay, that's something perhaps we may get into a little bit more. Jilly, in last week's main episode, I think I'm right in saying that you spoke at the beginning about the involvement of your son in the business and the fact that you'd had to consider gifting. Is that correct?
Yes, it has been. It has been the case that we've made progress on that, which is good. We've recognised that we're not spring chickens, and my husband Ed is a little bit older, and we really need to crack on. And it's also for us, to be able to actually enjoy the latter part of our lives. I mean, we've had very candid conversations about this and work-life balance. And I mean, we've tended to work all the time, all hours, have other businesses as well. And now, although we're still living over the shop and involved, we're not involved in day-to-day and hands-on. And it's much more strategic, it's much more directional. And so therefore, it actually, I think it was worse for me because, I was sort of interfering, I think would be the right word, on the day-to-day. Now I stand back in awe some days, actually, at how smoothly this transition has gone. But alongside that, you can't have transition without actually, in terms of the partnership, a transfer of assets.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And actually, in Series 6, Episode 3, we spoke with Jeremy Moody about the different ways that assets can be held and the fact that sometimes it's necessary to split the ownership of an asset from the operation of an asset. But Jilly, really great to hear that actually this process has been liberating for you from the sound of it. So that's wonderful to hear. Tom, I'll come back to you. What are the key things that people need to be thinking about when it comes to gifting?
Gosh, you'd be surprised at how much can come up for what should be a simple task of gifting. I mean, there's lots to it. There are the practicalities of things. There's the legalities of things. There are the tax implications. Please forgive me for any sort of degree to which this is slightly scattergun, because it will all depend on sitting down with you and discussing with you the quote-unquote problem and how we might address it and what the implications might be. But let's talk, tax to start with. Most people are aware that if you give something away, you need to survive 7 years before the value is outside of your inheritance tax estate. And indeed, some people take out insurance for that 7-year period to cover them in case they don't. There are lots of types of different allowances and exemptions which might be available for lifetime gifting as well. It's always worth having that sort of conversation with your advisor, because you might be able to make deductions which can be effective. Make good use of them. Making gifts, you don't just need to think about inheritance tax. There can be capital gains tax implications when you make a gift. There can even be stamp duty land tax implications. A common misconception is, I probably have it weekly, is somebody says, I made a gift of £50,000 5 years ago, but that reduces over time, doesn't it? Because I've survived between 3 and 7 years. Well, actually, that's not correct. And at the risk of going too technical and being a bit of a tax nerd, the explanation behind that, since I brought it up, is that you have to have given away more than your main allowance being £325,000. Up to your allowance of £325,000, you have to survive the full 7 years before that is outside of your estate. But if, say, you've given away £425,000, then you've given away £100,000, can I say, too much? And it is that £100,000 that will reduce over the 3 to 7 years. So that's a common misconception. So I suppose the point is, make sure you are informed. And if you are making different gifts in different orders, by order, they will have first bite of your allowance. And it all comes into it if you are making gifts to different people. Really important to keep careful records. Again, the revenue is going to want to know and want to see. They won't take your words for it or the words of your executors one day. Making gifts can have a serious impact on your wills. For example, if you're making an imbalance in gifts, let's say to the next generation, do you need to redress that in your wills as well? I've spoken a lot about tax there. Tax should be a key consideration, but of course, don't give away more than you can afford to. There's an affordability conversation to be had first. Try not to bridge this up. Understand what allowances you have in the first place before you give too much away. And you can speak to the right types of advisors about sort of income projection planning based on, putting it nice and cheerfully, your life expectancy, etc. And finally, I would say, for now, if you're going to make gifts onto the next generation, it's a good idea to have a conversation with those that you are giving to and sharing any concerns. I often say, when people will say to me, gosh, we don't mind our son, but we're not a huge fan of our daughter-in-law. Not specific, it works both ways. And my advice to them is, blame your solicitor when they say, we are only allowed to give this to you. Our solicitor will stop us gifting this to you unless we know you're getting married in September, and congratulations, but there's a document that you need to sign that agrees this, that, and the other. Not always, but actually it's becoming much more favourable because, when you blame the solicitor, there's nothing to hide, so to speak. Those are a few of the things that tend to come up, but it will always depend on the circumstances.
Gosh, lots to think about there, Tom. And I think that just really underlines the need to make sure that we're consulting professionals on our particular situation. It will change. The context will be different for everyone. So, this isn't advice as such. These are pointers of where people can start. Tom, really interested to hear you talking there about making sure that we're not giving away more than we can afford. And that's something which I've been aware of. I know that there were lots of discussions around this, certainly in that period between October 24 and December 25, when people were looking at giving away parts or all of their farms, but then they were concerned that, how am I going to live? My income comes from the farm. To what extent can people be prepared for that? You talked there a little bit about income projections. What should people be thinking there, Tom?
Thank you. Yes, I mean, there's a couple of points, a couple of different ways to angle my answer on that. And the first is to say something, if I may, that I failed to mention before, which is important, but fits in with within the answer to your question, which is that if you're giving any assets away, you need to make sure that you are not then seen to be benefiting from it anymore. So you need to be very careful if you're giving farming assets away, because even if you survive the 7 years, then it won't fall outside of the value of your estate. Okay, really important. The most basic level being, if I give you my house but continue to live in it rent-free, it will not work. And indeed, it can have double taxation and increased value taxation in certain circumstances. Well, I've had a gentleman come to me recently to say that he wants to give away a lot of his estate. And firstly, we had to we took him through projected exercise of what is your liability in the first place. He'd actually grossly overestimated it. So he was going to give away more than he needed to reduce his inheritance tax liability, which I don't think his wife would have been terribly happy with him over. There are advisors. So what I've done is I've sent him away to speak with a financial advisor, actually, because he is concerned about looking after himself in the future as well. And in those circumstances, he actually has quite a lot of liquidity. So with the right types of investments, he could actually probably support himself, and he might not need to keep, in this case, he has lots of rental properties. So he might not need to keep those. There's separate questions around that. But in the context of sort of, let's say, farming businesses, certainly we've been talking previously about partnership agreements, and this all needs to be reflected if you're going to make changes in partnership assets. And it's really important that listeners understand the notion and the concepts of having a partnership, an asset within the partnership. If you're passing those on, then that needs to be reflected in the partnership, whether that's in a reflection of the profit share, or perhaps you're then still taking a salary, but it's reflective of your notional capital ownership thereafter. So it's really important that you take, dare I say it, accountancy advice and corporate lawyer advice. And we do have one or two ones here who aren't too scary. So that all needs to be, there's plenty that comes into it when you're gifting assets away within the business as well.
Yes, certainly a lot to the whole subject. So, Jilly, just before we close, I'd like to come back to you and just get your general thoughts on what you've heard there from Tom, but particularly on gifting. Anything that's really jumping out at you?
Yeah, I think Tom really urged this element of making sure that you have your own cash pot, in a sense, and in gifting away assets, and particularly within partnership and a partnership trust, or where a partnership becomes a trustee, which we've been able to do, it does have quite a big impact on then the trading situation, because Ed and I, and this particular land block is about half of the 600 acres of the farm, and how that's going to work out with our accounts, and then not seen to have a benefit in kind, which thankfully our accountants are very on top of, and all the reporting that you need to do with a trust and such like. You sometimes don't realize some of the complexities of those tax positions, including under capital allowances where you bought, for example, you changed the JCB in that year or the tractor, that all changes as well. So I think I can't underestimate how important it is to have to before you do something in our situation particularly, you talk to the accountant. You make sure that you're covering all the bases before you go and do it, particularly as you come to, well before the year end position, when you've got this transition period. And then, we're in a whole new ball game actually in terms of our farm accounts, because of the partnership being a trust of one large land bank, which we've done to protect it and to protect the whole of the estate as well. So, and the drafting of documents, trust documents, it's really important to have that expertise there as well, which clearly Tom has too. And there's an awful lot of hand-holding, professional hand-holding in this. It's not something that I've, I had a massive learning curve with my late father. There's no doubt about it, massive, and that sits there as a good reminder of get it sorted. But this has got real complexities about it. You've got to really be wise, and I think you've got to do the best you can for your family, do the best you can. And hopefully they will appreciate and understand that, because in the latter years of your life, not having the worry or the anxiety and enjoying your life and that balance is so important. So important.
Brilliant. Jilly, thank you so much for those thoughts. So there's no quick fixes and important not to just act, but get advice and get it sorted. Tom, very briefly, one final thought from you. What do people really need to be aware of if they're thinking, they're considering gifting in any way with their estate planning?
Well, hopefully we've demonstrated, and Jilly's again just spoken firsthand there, what my take from listening to her is how crucial being informed is. Being informed is basically strength, isn't it? Because otherwise you're operating in a vacuum, and you don't know what's going to be down the line, and that's going to completely disrupt your planning, your legacy. And we do see where it's led because the right advice was not taken. We do see unknown tax consequences. We do see unexpected practical implications, and in some cases invalidity and illegality even. So that's the last thing you want. Often things will be promised to people which are too good to be true. Please try to avoid doing things homemade if you can. Just find an advisor who you don't dislike too much and that you can sit in a room with for a little while, and hopefully with a good coffee machine, because you can get through it. I promise we are not too bad, and it will make the difference.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Tom. Jilly, Tom, thank you so much for your time today on this bonus episode. It's been great speaking with you this week and last week, and we look forward to speaking to you again in the future.
Cornish Mutual, farming insurance experts.